Okay, so we've spent a bunch of time thinking about chance and randomness and the ways that we can work with that in code. Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about images. Now, so far, we've worked only with geometric shapes like squares and circles and stuff like that. But when we think about computer graphics, one of the things that, of course, comes to mind is photographs, video, that kind of thing. So we're going to be talking today about how we can load images, should display them on screen, ways that we can manipulate and collage them. If you come back for creative programming 2, we'll do a much deeper dive into like manipulating pixels, creating filters, which leads into topics like computer vision and artificial intelligence, where we can actually use those techniques to extract information from photos and videos. We can track objects or identify things. But for now, we're just going to talk about some of the basics, and we can actually make some really, really cool stuff using this. Photographs, of course, too, yeah, it's the thing that we think of with computer graphics. It's hard to find out exact information, but from my research, I found approximately 1.8 billion photographs per day are uploaded to the internet, which makes this like a really cool thing to kind of like explore and play with. So, without further ado, let's see how we can just load and display an image in P5JS. So we have our sketch here, but we actually need to, if we want to display an image, P5JS needs some way to see and have access to that image. Um, Now, this is where JavaScript gets a little tricky. Maybe we have an image that's somewhere else on the internet that we want to be able to display, but JavaScript has a lot of security measures in place that prevent, malicious things from happening in your browser. Imagine you're like on your banking website or something like that, and so JavaScript has a lot of these controls, which also means that there's a lot of sometimes frustrating limitations on what you can do. Like, so for example, it won't let you load an image from a random URL because it doesn't really know if that's safe or not. So what we need to do is actually upload a photograph from our computer into the P5JS editor, and then we can have access to it there. If you're working on locally on your computer instead of in the editor, then this isn't an issue. And we'll talk about that next time. So we'll walk through kind of that whole process. But for now, if you in the editor, if you go to this little arrow over here, and we looked at this previously, where we saw the index.html file, which goes alongside our sketch. But this is also where we can upload images or other files if you're working with data or something like that. So if I click this little down arrow, I'm going to make a folder to put this in. This is just going to help keep this cleaner and nicer. So let's just create a folder. You'll see in many of the P5JS examples that this is called assets. So we'll go ahead and do that. Click add folder. And now you'll see assets show up over here. And then if you hover over it, you get another little down arrow. And if I click on this, now I can either create a file or upload a file. And I want to upload this. So click on this. And it's got a really easy interface. We just drag and drop. So I have off to the side here, you can't see it, but I have a file here for us. I'm just going to drag this in, and you'll see a little progress bar. It uploads it. Now it's a little wonky. It works great, but the feedback is a little unclear when it's uploaded. It's hard to tell. You'll notice for a second it got me this little check mark that tells me it's done, and then there's no like okay. We have to click this X to close it, but I can see test.jpg is here. There's no way to view it, unfortunately, but it's there. It's there. Cool. So now we can go back to sketch.js, and I'm going to just close this sidebar so we have a little more room to work here. And when I load my image, I'm going to load it into a variable. So we've normally thought of variables as things like numbers or text, but it can also be images and other things. So I'm going to say let img, and I'm not going to define anything else here. I'm just creating this. Remember, variables created at the very top outside of setup and draw are called global variables, and these are accessible to our whole program, which is what we want in this case. So there's another important idea in JavaScript that we're now going to run into, and this is the idea of asynchronous. Did I spell that right? I did not. Let's see, asynchronous. I think that's right. Asynchronous code. So in a lot of programming languages, commands are executed in order, and it stops the program until that command is finished before going on to the next one. JavaScript, in part because it's running in the browser, right? Like data is being sent back and forth. There's routers and you know this whole system of wires and stuff going on servers. Things may arrive at different times, and so JavaScript, in order to deal with that, runs a lot of things asynchronously. And we haven't really noticed that before because our commands have been really quick. It's just drawing commands and stuff like that. But when we load an image, it's a pretty big file. It may become an issue, and we obviously don't want to try to display an image before it's finished loading because we're either going to get an error or nothing's going to happen. And if you've used other synchronous programming languages like Java or Python, this can be really frustrating and really challenging to get used to. But luckily, P5JS has helped us out a little bit and created a built-in function called preload. And preload is not here in the template by default because we don't need it for basic stuff like we've been doing. But preload will happen before the setup, and it's got some behind the scenes code that makes sure that it doesn't go on to setup until preload is finished. And so preload is perfect for loading our image, and we can just say img, that's our variable for our image, img equals load image, and then in quotation marks, either single or double quotes, we need to provide the location for this image. And in this case, it's in a folder called assets slash the file name, which in this case is test.jpg. And we can do JPEGs, we can do PNGs. I believe it can do still GIFs. It can't do an animated GIF. And that's it. That's all we need to be able to load this image. I'm going to resize my canvas. I happen to know how big my image is. It's 400 by 311. And then I'm going to add no loop here as well. And then in my draw, I actually don't need a background because I'm going to display this image on screen. And the easiest way to do this is the image command. And then it takes 3 arguments. It takes the name of the image or the variable of that image, so img, and then the x and y coordinates. So I'm going to put it at 0, 0. And this draws just like a rectangle. Now, if I run this, you'll see it shows this little loading text as it loads it. And here we go. I love this image. This is a Kodak, old school Kodak test image here. And it's actually great for this because it has a huge range of colors. It has lots of light things, dark things, saturated things, more muted colors, plus super rad, fluffy frills and curly hair and stuff like that. It's totally great. So this is one way that we can draw an image. Another way, actually, the image command has 2 additional parameters that we can specify. So right now, this is the image to draw and the X and the Y, but we can optionally add a width and height to this. So I can say image, img, we'll draw the same one. Let's also do it at 0, 0, but let's do it at 100 by 100 pixels. And now when I run this, you'll see it's squished because the proportions aren't the same, but this image shows up again over here. So once we've loaded the image one time, now we can access it and use it multiple times within our code, and we can resize it as well, which is pretty cool. Now this resize operation is temporary. It only happens as it's drawing it. If we wanted to more permanently resize this image, we could say img.resize. So img here is the name of that variable, of that image, and then .resize is a command that we're calling on that image. And we can do this one of 2 ways. We could specify the width and the height both, but also really conveniently, P5JS will allow us to specify one, either width or height. And then if the other number is 0, then it's going to proportionally resize it to fit. And that's great because you don't have to do the math to figure that out. So resize on its own isn't going to display the image. It just sort of rescales it. And then we can draw in its new resized format using image command again. And let's put it at halfway across and at the top. And now you can see it gets resized and redrawn over here, which is pretty cool. So we upload an image, we create a folder, we upload an image to the editor. There's a few, we use preload to open it or to load it into our sketch. And then there's a few different ways that we can draw this image on screen. There's one more useful thing that I want to show you. It's a little advanced, but we'll see at the very end an example of where this is really helpful. And we can add something in preload called a callback. And a callback is, we can, in this case, actually, we can do two different callbacks. We can do a callback is a function that our code runs when a task is completed. And in this case, we can do it when the image is, if the image is successfully loaded, we can have something happen. Or if there's an error, we can have something happen. So load image here doesn't require anything else, but if we add this additional parameter, we can do comma, and then the name of a function. Now you'll notice this is not the normal way that we would call a function. Normally if we have one called, image loaded, you do it with the parentheses like this. Callbacks, you only specify the name of the function, no parentheses, and you can't send any arguments to it. At least not. There's lots of ways to do this kind of thing, but in this format, we just give it the name. And now what's going to happen is that when the load image command finishes and is successful, it's going to run a function that we'll create called image loaded. And I'm going to do that down here. And this is not pre-made sort of function. This is something that we create, so we can call it whatever we want. And in this case, I can just say console.log the image loaded. Boom. So now when I run this, the only change that's going to happen, nothing else is going to change, except that when the image successfully loads, we're going to see a message down here. And we should see the image loaded, which is great. There's a lot of reasons you might want to do this. One would be just like validation to make sure everything was working correctly. Maybe you have a whole bunch of images that you're loading and you want to resize them after they're loaded, or even display them when they're finished. So there's a bunch of ways that you could think about using this. For now, I just wanted to show you that. And like I said, we'll see in a future example some other ways that we might use this. So that's it. It's super easy. We load an image, we display it on the screen, and in the next couple videos, we'll see a bunch of examples of how you'll use this.